So we are reconvening this open meeting of the board. We are being asked to consider the contents of the consent agenda. Could someone please move consent agenda number 4?
So moved, seconded by Director Demare.
Thank you. Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Okay. And is there, we're moving on to the delegation, which is urban systems. And that is item number.
7.2.
Someone help me out here.
7.2.
7.2. Awesome.
7.2. Asset management policy. Urban systems.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I should have pulled it for you.
So I will turn this over to CAO Paul to introduce the topic and our presenters, please.
Thanks, everyone. We are. 7.2 request for decision asset management policy number 37-2024 and asset management strategy. We have 2 staff members. We have Director Suzanne Lafranche, Director of Finance. We have Celia, who has been coordinating and leading this project, and then a representative from Urban Systems. I'll pass it over to you, Celia.
Thank you, Heather. It's been a pleasure to work with Urban Systems and Brittany and all involved staff with this project. Brittany has a 20-minute long presentation, and then we'll turn it over to staff for questions after that. Go ahead, Brittany. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I just want to do a quick check that everyone can hear me clearly. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Celia. I think if you could just advance to the next slide, that would be great. Wonderful. So I'll start with introducing providing an overview of the project in terms of its purpose, why we were doing this, and then the outcomes, what we wanted to accomplish through it. So the purpose here is to advance the SLRD's asset management processes and practices. And then the even bigger why for doing that is to support sustainable service delivery. So that's why any sort of local government works on asset management or has a program and works on implementing it is in service of those broader outcomes. So for this specific project here, what we wanted out of it was an updated asset management policy and governance structure. So that's something that the SLRD already had. And then we wanted to revisit that just, with fresh eyes because time had passed. Let's do a check on what's still relevant, what's serving the SLRD, what's not, what might need to change. So we updated the policy and governance structure. And then we also wanted to develop an asset management strategy. So something that provides some direction in alignment with the policy and helps achieve the principles articulated in it. And then we've also developed an implementation roadmap tool to support implementation of the strategy. So how these work together here, on the right-hand side of this slide, here's a bit of a conceptual framework. So the policy provides that highest level direction in terms of guiding principles. And then the asset management strategy then articulates the objectives. So what you want to accomplish or see, or you might think of it as, we'll know we're being successful when we see these things happening. And then the strategy also articulates then focus areas for improvements to processes and practices, and then some priority actions to take. So really, at a more granular, practical level there, here are some specific steps that the SLRD can take in alignment with those focus areas to achieve the objectives, and all in alignment with the guiding principles of the policy. And then the governance structure, which I think actually, like really practically speaking, lives in the policy. But again, just kind of conceptually, it then outlines the roles and responsibilities for implementation of the overall asset management program. So again, just to recap that, the policy and the governance structure were updates to what already existed. And then this was the first strategy that the SLRD was developing. And I'll add here too that all of this aligns with some of the priority areas in the SLRD strategic plan. So really specifically those that relate to sustainability, and then also to responsible governance and excellence. And then I think even indirectly to community well-being and livability. Again, when you think of why you invest in asset management and getting better at your processes and practices, it's really in service of all of those priority areas. I think you could advance to the next slide. Great, thank you. Okay, so that articulates why we were doing it, what we wanted out of the process. This is how we went about doing it. So I think a really great framework to go back to at a time like this is the overall, it's often referred to as like the wheel. It's the BC framework for sustainable service delivery. So it outlines asset management as a continuous process of assessing, planning, and implementing. So as long as you're in the business of providing services and having assets that deliver those services, you'll always be going through this process. And this just gives some language to that process. So a lot of the assessment work had already been completed in, I mean, if you want to think of it as prior phases or just that initial work that had to be done to set the stage for strategy work to be done. So if you'll recall, it would have been last year, I think, we met on the CAMP, the Corporate Asset Management Plan. So that was focused on assessing the SLRD's assets. So that's, one of the components of the red part of the wheel there. And then prior to that, the SLRD had done an assessment of a process and practices, or you might think of it as asset management maturity or capacity. Those are sometimes the terms used. So that's another component of the wheel. So we built upon what we learned through both of those processes to develop the strategy and update the policy. So that yellow part of the wheel was really the focus of this project here. So how we did that was through a 2-day strategy session with what we've come to call the Asset Management Working Group. We also then had a number of sessions with the asset management program stewards, so some key staff and managers there to identify updates to the policy. And that was a really collaborative process between Urban and SLRD. It was really enjoyable. We had some follow-up meetings then to further refine the focus areas and actions in the strategy. There were a lot of discussions even internally amongst SLRD staff. And then all of that got documented in the deliverables shared with you here today or in advance of today. So again, most of our work here focused on that planning part. So having a strategy and then the policy. And then the SLRD already has the CAMP, which forms that asset management plan part of the yellow part of the wheel there. And then you have all of the ongoing work of implementation ahead of you, which is, again, just kind of continuously going through this wheel here. So I think we could go on to the next one, and then we could maybe take some questions after that. So the asset management policy, like I said, this was an update to one that had already existed. And updates focus mostly on making the scope of the policy clearer. So really specifically, like what you even wanted the policy to do for you. So we made that part clear, and then also endeavored to make the actual policy statements, like the commitments or the guiding principles that were outlined in them, clearer, and a real intentional lens on those statements was what is also feasible for the SLRD to do, while also wanting to honor and stay aligned with best practices. So that's how we landed on the guiding principles that we did. And so some key things to highlight here is that it outlines the SLRD's commitment to continuously improving your asset management practices, outlines those guiding principles for the development and implementation of the program, which again, your strategy is a tool to help you do that. And then, like I said, the roles and responsibilities. The scope of this applies to all engineered and natural assets that provide regional services to the community as organizational capacity allows. And again, this aligns with best practices. And I won't go through each of the guiding principles line by line, but just again, the essence of them, they relate to continuous improvement over time. Like this is an ultra marathon, definitely not a sprint. They relate to considering and balancing trade-offs when making decisions about investments in assets and any regional services that they provide. Other guiding principles relate to collaboration between departments and then also with contractors, just recognizing that there are a lot of people and parties ultimately involved in delivering services in the SLRD. And then some other principles relate to resourcing and then just other considerations in decision making. So those are kind of the thematic elements of the policy. So if you want to move on to the next one, then we can talk about the governance structure. So again, this was an update to one that had already existed, and it was really just to, again, make it more relevant to the here and now and to the scope of the asset management program that has been outlined in the strategy. So just some key things to highlight here. The governance structure outlines responsibilities, like really specifically what is the role in decisions as they relate to asset management. And then who's the group or the individual responsible for that? And then we've also outlined some recommended representation. So a key thing to highlight here at this level would be, the board. The proposed responsibilities there would be, of course, deciding or approving decisions that have any sort of funding implications, that relate to the financial plan. And then approving the asset management policy, because this would be, a policy that would affect the entire organization. And so what we've come to call the program stewards there, those were the folks that were really closely involved in developing all of these tools here, and then will be really closely involved in implementing and bringing others alongside to support their implementation. Another thing to highlight here is that this really just shows that it's not one person's responsibility. As much as we worked really closely with, for example, Celia and Suzanne and Omar to develop these tools, it is really not just up to them or even a subset of them to implement them. This is really an organization-wide effort. Lots of change management involved. This is a multi-year program that has been set out here in the strategy. And then I will say here too that just, on the topic of governance, what we've done, and this shows up in the implementation support tool, is that governance should then be defined at more of like a project level or for those priority actions at that kind of level. So really clearly delineating for each of those projects, what are decision points on them, when does the board need to be involved, and how the board will be involved in different ways for each of those projects, just depending on the nature of them. So if you want to move on to the next one, then that gets into some of the more details here. So this is a one-pager. It's kind of like a placemat sort of summary of everything that's outlined in the strategy. And so it outlines there that conceptual framework that we walked through. And then we've outlined here 6 objectives for what we want to accomplish through the development and implementation of, more formalized asset management processes and practices. There are then 5 focus areas here to serve as like true focuses for improvements. So this can be a bit of a filter on checking, for any of the actions that come up or any other future ideas. This is a really common thing that comes up during implementation, is that lots of other ideas will come up for, things that could be done or investments that could be made. And the focus areas serve as a good check on, well, what would that do for us? And would this align with something that we've set as a priority here? So you might also think of these as maybe strategies. So enhanced communication and engagement, that's at all levels in the organization. Consistency in asset management practices, that's something that, if you can work on that, it enables better corporate storytelling and understanding and communications with the public as well about the state of services and what kind of investments are needed. Integration of people and information. So this really relates to bringing together, information about assets, funding and finances, along with the people that are really closest to that information and would otherwise be impacted by decisions. So we have some priority actions related to those. Direction for investments in enabling tools and resources. And then a really big one is, as much as big leaps were made with the corporate asset management plan, getting to know your assets and services is still a continuous improvement journey. And so we've still outlined that as a focus area. The camp provided, an overall snapshot of what is understood about assets and services now and where there might be some gaps, but it also set the stage for a lot more detailed data gathering and, condition assessments and that sort of thing. So then the strategy also outlines a number of priority actions in alignment with those focus areas to make improvements. So these aren't all created equal. Like some of these are really more like time-bound projects that you could say, here's a start and we've completed this thing here now, and then you'll move on to implementation of anything that comes out of it. Whereas some of these are, more ongoing practices. They're kind of, think of them more as like habits or behaviors that should be integrated into planning and decision making and regular operations and ways that staff and the board work. So we've clarified what those are, in more detail in the strategy itself, but I've just summarized them here again, just to provide a big picture of where of what's important and what the SLRD should be focusing on to make improvements. And again, a lot of this was informed too by the findings from the maturity assessment or that gap analysis that was done, as well as then what we learned about the SLRD's assets from the corporate asset management plan. So I know that was a lot. We've covered a lot of actually really important, like pretty big concepts there that have implications for the SLRD, especially like the policy there with the guiding principles, and then this strategy really being in alignment with that. But I wanted to at least just touch on those things, and then we can certainly take questions and comments about some of the more details if there's any interest in that. And I know staff are very keen to support in answering questions as well.
Thank you, Brittany.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. The one thing that I wasn't clear on is, and you touched on it briefly, but natural asset management isn't explicitly mentioned so often. And I guess I'm wondering if that's necessary, if it's just understood as a first class citizen of asset management now, or because to my mind, it's sort of still a newer thing. And so I'm just wondering if it's not mentioned because, again, everyone assumes it's first class, or is it because it's a bit more aspirational for us at this point and we'll start working on it, or just sort of understanding where that is and if it's worthwhile to be more explicit about that, or we're just too early.
I can try to answer that through the chair. So the new policy now, we have included natural assets. We have not been very explicit about it in the policy or in the strategy. And that is intentional because we don't know yet exactly where our journey goes in there, but it's more of an aspiration to consider natural assets in our decision making, and just to take it in as an opportunity at this point to start thinking about it and give it the chance to mature within staff and with the capacity we have. One of the things that we are doing soon is most likely procuring an asset management software. And so just having that in the back of our mind is that we do have it in the policy and that software can support natural assets as well when we do procure it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And I was sort of just thinking about, my mind went to thoughts about managing sewage and stuff in areas which don't have treatment, and just, in a municipal context, natural asset management seems a bit easier in a sense, but it just seems in a regional district, it's actually so much more important, but so huge. I don't know how you wrap your head around it. Thank you. Appreciate the answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I've got two questions. Well, one comment and one question. So the comment is on natural assets. At the Local Government Leadership Academy, there was a session on natural assets. And it was well attended, and it was a really good presentation. And it talked about just what you've got in this about servicing the public. And they went into watersheds and what's going on in the Columbia Basin with the work to do in the wetlands, and so on and so forth. So, it's really good to see that in there. One of the things that we did with the new Area A OCP was make the whole Area A part of it. Before, it was only a portion of it. And the reason I wanted it was because of the natural assets that we have in Area A. So that's really good to see it in there. The other one is, you've mentioned on Focus Area 1, and I'll read it. What this means: communicating early, often, and in different ways with the board, with taxpayers, with contractors, and across the organization. Nowhere in this document does it talk about communicating with the taxpayers, other than just that sentence there. And so I'm just curious, when we get condition assessment and asset management plans completed, how are we going to communicate this out to the taxpayers? Is it stated in here?
Thank you. Through the chair. That specific project is not mentioned there, but the focus area of enhanced communication and engagement, it is meant to cover all enhanced communication and engagement, not just the project and initiatives that are specifically mentioned there. So staff are very aware of this, and even though it's not mentioned there, we probably will put it on the roadmap as we come together as an asset management steering committee, again, as one of our projects to make a plan on how we communicate asset management plans to the public once we receive them from consultants in a language that is very different from how we will communicate it to the public, just because of the complexity of those plans. Does that answer your question? Or does Omar and Suzanne want to add to that?
Oh, no, I think you covered it well. It's just something we have to work out internally. So we know that's a task for our asset management maturity.
Yeah, it's really important that the public knows what they have and what needs to be done to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any more hands. I wanted to add, I was really pleased to see the natural assets entered there, even if it's only in a preliminary way. It's certainly something that would be very important when we get to doing Area B OCP, and well, like Area A, probably value that a lot in our plan and maybe get it better defined. Thank you. Jen?
Thank you.
Okay. So everyone in the room has had their opportunity. So the the motion is to repeal asset management policy number 9-2017. Could someone make that motion, please?
There, seconded by Director Herford.
Okay, any opposed? Motion carries. And that the board approve policy number 37-2024 asset management policy.
Director Rainbow and Director Demare.
Thank you. Any comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. And that staff proceed with the implementation of the policy and strategy.
Director Rainbow, Director Herford,
Comments?
Director Pettigill.
Yeah, just want to thank staff for this. This is one of the things as an elected, I look forward to really understand what we need to plan for in our budgeting. Like it's so critical. I first came to government. We did things like this on a condo board I was on, and then finding out that was sort of new for municipal governments was a bit of a shock to me, but very pleased to see this sort of work happening and improving, because it does make the job so much easier. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the three of you for being here today, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna bounce around for a little while because we want to take care of a couple of things that need to be adjusted in their order of play. So could I ask someone please that we move to close this meeting to the public to manage some of the closed item agenda, agenda items moved by.
Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Herford.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.